Hello and welcome to Business Standard. Here's a glimpse of the views expressed on the web pages of Business Standard this week. In his weekly column National Interest, Shekhar Gupta writes that Narendra Modi won power in 2014 on the promise of massive economic growth, jobs and development on the Gujarat model. But barring the first 2 years, he has never delivered on that promise. So what is it that works for Modi if not the economy? Or how does he keep winning in spite of the economy? It's likely because on national pride, standing up to terrorism from the neighborhood, on restoring the majesty of the Prime Minister's office, Modi scores 10 on 10. The belated flurry of economic reform would suggest Modi has figured out that his script is getting jaded and that he needs a new one. He will try for an economic recovery but still stick to what has worked for him so far. The three-pronged offering of massive welfareism for the poorest, visible infrastructure building, and Hindutva nationalism, Gupta writes. In his weekly column for the Business Standard, T.N. Nayanan writes on the spreading BJP footprint in the country. Nayanan writes that the BJP's rise shows two things. First, the party is better at winning elections than at governance. On the latter, it gets by with exaggerated claims. Second, it remains intent on pushing ahead with its trademark social and political agenda. So among other things, the citizenship laws so far held in abeyance could prove to be flashpoints. He writes that while the BJP's influence is rising in the east, and it will win in West Bengal if not this, then the next time, those hoping for Paribartan as far as the issue of jobs and livelihoods is concerned are likely to be disappointed. In his weekly column for the Business Standard, Mahesh Vyas writes that the impact of the brutal lockdown last year still lingers. Household incomes had not recovered to their pre-lockdown levels even in October 2020, the latest month for which income data is available. The cost of the lockdown so far is this loss of about 11 million jobs. The loss of these jobs is almost equally spread between business persons, salaried employees, and daily wage earners. The recovery of jobs seems to have stopped 2% short of its earlier level, and recovery of non-farm jobs seems to have stopped 4% short of its earlier level. It's important that a fresh lockdown does not make this worse. Vaccines and masks are a better bet, Vyas says. In a column for Business Standard, Vinayak Chatterjee writes that economic surveys in recent times have offered some fresh insights. Memorable ones include Universal Basic Income and Bad Bank. The latest economic survey under Chief Economic Advisor K.V. Subramanian has formulated and presented an interesting new index called the BNI, the Bare Necessities Index. The BNI has been created for all states on drinking water, sanitation, hygiene, and housing conditions in India. It's hoped that along with other accepted indices of measuring well-being such as per capita income, nutrition, health, and so on, the BNI will get its rightful place in all future evaluations of the quality of life in India, Chatterjee writes. In a column for Business Standard, Ajay Shukla writes that the most far-reaching structural change to the military that the Defense Ministry is currently evaluating relates to restructuring the Army, Navy, and Air Force. This involves merging 17 single service commands into a smaller number of joint service commands in which the combat capabilities of all three services are synergized to create greater battlefield effect. To oversee this, the government created the post of a Tri-Service Chief of Defense Staff or CDS, and in January last year elevated the Army Chief at that time, General Bipin Rawat, to be the first CDS. In the first 15 months since then, much work has been done, but crucial questions remain. Who will the Joint Service Commanders report to in wartime? Will their boss be the CDS, who will directly control combat operations, or will they report to a Defense Council, an unwieldy committee headed by the Defense Minister? Shukla writes. In a column for Business Standard, TCS Srinivas Raghavan writes that two sad things have happened to Indian economics in the past 20 years. One is that far too many economists seem to have lost interest in economic history. The other is that while those born after 1980 have remained largely apolitical, many of those born earlier have turned almost unbecomingly partisan. Modern economics, however, is about data and not what you think of it. Contrary to what many economists would like us to believe, economic and various socio-economic indicators have actually improved quite significantly under the Modi government. It's all very fashionable to go on criticizing the government on its economic performance, but this criticism is not always on the basis of facts, something economists just cannot afford to do, writes Srinivasa Raghavan. In an editorial, Business Standard writes that the Supreme Court's verdict last week upholding the position of the Tatas brought the curtains down on one of the ugliest corporate wars in India. It was no doubt a big victory for the Tata Group, as the court allowed all its appeals and upheld the right of a majority shareholder to make appointments to key leadership positions. The apex court's scathing criticism of the ministries should be music to the ears of the Tatas. Among other things, the court accused Cyrus Mistry of trying to set his own house on fire as Tata Sons chairman and observed that such a person does not deserve to continue as part of any decision-making body. But the best part of the judgment was that it put an end to the possibility of disruption and dysfunction in one of the country's largest business groups, the editorial said. In an editorial, Business Standard writes that the investing world was shocked last week by block trades worth billions of dollars thanks to positions being closed by Wall Street in order to try and evade the fallout of the collapse of a hedge fund called Archegos Capital Management. Archegos is the family office of Bill Hwang, who is forbidden by regulators in the US and Hong Kong from managing outside clients' money. This was because he was accused of violating trading rules at his former hedge fund. Archegos, like all family offices, escapes direct regulatory oversight. The splash zone created by the sinking of Archegos means regulators globally will have to ask some tough questions about the risks family offices are running, the editorial says. Business Standard writes in an editorial that the Indian government securities could be included in the FTSE Russell Emerging Markets Government Bond Index. This would encourage the entry of fresh overseas funds at a time when the government is borrowing huge sums to bridge the fiscal deficit. The inclusion in a major global index will also impact the exchange rate and the yield curve of Indian bonds. It may help to deepen the illiquid secondary market for bonds as well. As and when India makes the cut for inclusion, it would automatically ensure interest in rupee treasuries from a new set of foreign portfolio investors. Ballpark estimates suggest a market of India's size could easily attract $10 billion of inflows in the first year of inclusion and larger inflows over time, the editorial says. Business Standard writes in an editorial that India appears to have practically halted exports of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine being made by the Serum Institute of India to save those shots for domestic use. The fact that India, which was presenting itself as the vaccine factory of the world, may now also be giving in to vaccine nationalism is a reflection of the broader failure of robust supply chains and trade over the course of the pandemic. It's clear that a greater robustness in supply chains alongside a proper diversification will need to be a priority post-pandemic. Supply chain diversification will have an efficiency cost, but it will add stability. In the end, the basic principles of free trade must continue to apply. The instincts underlying vaccine nationalism must not be normalized, the editorial says.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.